Okay, so first off, thank you everybody for joining us tonight for one of our sustainability dialogues. We're happy to have Sarah Rodriguez with us tonight from Tri-City, a new regular at our dialogue series, is back from presenting to us not too long ago. A couple quick, very quick announcements before we get started. First of all, you all found the dialogue tonight, so you are probably following us on our newsletter, but if not, all of our sustainability dialogues, events, happenings, sustainability news can be found in our monthly newsletter. And so if you're not already signed up for that, that's a great way to kind of keep on top of all the happenings in Claremont and surrounding communities dealing with sustainability. My colleague Han is going to drop that into the chat box. And if you want to sign up, that would be great. Next, really quick announcement is we are having a fundraiser right now where we're trying to raise funds to help with our programs and to support activities like the dialogue that we have tonight. And so we have a sustainable Claremont hoodie that we're selling. So if you're interested, I actually got mine on, if you can see that. And they're pretty cool, green and kind of tan writing. So if you'd like your own sustainable Claremont hoodie, we would love for you to go ahead and order one of those. And again, my colleague Han will drop the link to that in the chat box. Okay, so our speaker tonight, let's just jump into it. Our speaker tonight is Sarah Rodriguez. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's been on the mental and behavioral health field for 18 years now. She works at Tri-City Mental Health as a clinical therapist for the Therapeutic Community Garden Program and serves on the board of directors for the American Horticultural Therapy Association. It's her second time with us, so we're so happy to have her back. And we can't wait to hear what she has to present to us. As she's giving her presentation, if you have any questions, please hold them to the end. If it's pertinent to what she's saying at the moment, feel free to drop it in the chat box and she'll kind of be monitoring that as she's going through her presentation and might be able to kind of take those questions in stride. Otherwise, if you put them in the chat box, my colleague Han and I will kind of collect those questions and feed those to Sarah at the end of the presentation. All right, Sarah. I'll stop talking and thanks so much, and I'll throw it to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Very appreciative of you having me here tonight and representing the Therapeutic Community Garden at Tri-City Mental Health. I'm also going to continue admitting people here, just entered a couple more people. So yeah, and thank you for that intro. That really covers everything nicely. I did want to present today in general on why at Tri-City and many other programs throughout the US and throughout the world are utilizing nature, the garden space, the outdoors to address our mental health and wellness, and why this is a very viable, accessible, and pertinent modality to achieve a higher level of mental health and wellness. So the presentation today is entitled, "This is Your Brain on Nature." The agenda for today that we will jump into is a little bit about the program I work for. I'm gonna kind of travel through our senses, like, well, why? Why is nature and the garden space when it comes to what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch? Why is that impacting us different than maybe other modalities and the techniques that they're using? So there's a list of what we'll get into where it comes to color, nature sounds versus man-made sounds, smell, memories, emotion is going to come into that, prospect refuge theory, and Mycobacterium Vaccae. So jumping right into it, Therapeutic Community Garden at Tri-City Mental Health is a prevention and early intervention program with really, at the end of the day, we are there to hook people up with the skills, with the techniques for them to support themselves in times of need, when they're stressed, when they're anxious, when they're feeling a little depressed, discouraged, you name it, fill in the blank. We're hoping that the skills we teach them in the Therapeutic Community Garden, myself along with my colleagues, Corey, Elizabeth, Kira, my boss, Dr. Nicole Lobato, we are hoping that we can instill coping skills related to our connection to nature and the garden space at the end of the day. So we're there to prevent. If someone does need a higher level of care, if maybe psychotropics are in order, or they need housing support, or maybe they just want one-on-one therapy, we we provide groups, right? So another part of our job is going to be referrals, but ourselves, we are prevention and early intervention. In part, we exist because of the millionaire's tax. So anyone who makes over $1 million in California, 1% of that additional monies earned is taken and put into programs like ours. So that is part of the reason we exist. We have a big drive and goal to serve the 0 to 25 population, our transitional aged youth. They are very underserved, very underrepresented, and go through a lot of struggles, understandably so, with the various developmental stages they're in between 0 to 25, really go under the radar a lot of times when certain support is needed. So really, we're out there for the 0 to 25 population, including our older adults, including veterans. There's a lot of specialized populations that we do try to provide services to. And again, through our program, those services are going to be free. You know, we generally ask for a little bit of support, possibly with purchasing certain items for workshops, depending on how in-depth the technique is going to be. For example, if they want to, you know, a whole garden bed built as opposed to learning how to propagate herbs, that funding is going to look really different. But for the most part, our services are free. Claremont, Pomona, and Laverne is our service area. So typically, and at the end, I'll email Stuart our schedule. Maybe that can go out, or you can drop your email in the box. I'll make sure to get that to you personally. We do have a schedule, and we serve Claremont, Pomona, and Laverne on a weekly basis with reoccurring groups. But much like tonight, where we're coming out just to speak to you, much like what we do with the colleges and various organizations in our communities, we're going in for one-time drop-in workshops. Maybe we're going once a year, twice a year. We may support staff, students, or residents. So you don't have to live in Pomona, Claremont, or Laverne. You can go to school or work there. In some way, you're connected to these three cities. You qualify for our prevention and early intervention services. So jumping in, just starting with what we see, you know, when we go outside. Typically, if you're thinking of nature, probably greenscapes pop into your brain. Of course, we know that we have beautiful desert areas around here. We have Joshua Tree that's very accessible, where you're going to see a different colorscape. But in general, green has jumped to the forefront of our brains when we think of nature. And when it comes to color psychology, green has association, before we even think about nature, with being very restful and calm, diffusing anxiety, being very inviting. And of course, we do have that association with nature and green. Many studies are coming out that have shown the reliability and validity of green reducing anxiety, reducing blood pressure, and having stress reducing effects in our brains and bodies. So you end up seeing this in the walls in hospitals, right? In veteran hospitals, you may see a very pale green color painted on the walls, and even that's doing a little something. So really what we're going to say is, hey, getting out into nature, like being outside, seeing those trees, seeing the canopy of trees, seeing the grass and the various diverse plant array that we have here in Southern California, you're going to want to do that, right? Get in touch with nature. But not everyone can do that, right? So simply looking out your window at a green space or looking at the color green have similar effects as looking out into a natural space. Of course, being in the natural space, it's enhanced, but green in it of itself, because of what it represents, because of what it's doing to our brains and bodies, immediately elicits a calm and a relaxation. From a biological perspective, one of the places this starts is the visible spectrum of color for humans, right? When you think about all the colors that we can see that come into our eyes, green is in the middle of that color spectrum. So if you think about our ocular muscles having to strain when it goes to the left or when it goes to the right, when we look at red, the strain of the muscle, and then the color red maybe being associated with more intense emotions, maybe love, maybe anger, but albeit more intense, right? Green is right in the middle. So when you're looking at green, not only is there this association with nature and this calming effect happening, it's starting with, wow, my muscles in my head, my ocular muscles are right now relaxed. Where the body starts, the mind follows. So that is just kind of the beginning of why that may or not happen, may or may not happen for all of us. So easy on the eyes. And then we have psychoacoustics. So really the study of sound, how we perceive sound, how sound ends up being transferred from, you know, our ears to our brains, and the effects thereafter. Sound in general is really interesting when it comes to nature, because the sounds you hear in nature are very different than the sounds that man can create, right? Humans can create. So in general, sound is capable of producing really powerful reactions in the listener. So while we're sitting here in relatively safe, calm environments, I would imagine, a sudden loud noise, like a car backfiring outside of your house, is going to send you into that fight or flight response temporarily. We can come back to it and find our baseline, but we're going to have that rush of adrenaline. Our eyes are going to dilate. Our faces are going to flush. We may sweat a little bit. That sudden loud noise, just from being loud and sudden, is going to create a reaction in us as human beings, right? And rightfully so. The fight or flight response can be a scary experience, but it's there to keep us alive, right? Many practitioners will say, well, yeah, if that bear is coming into the cave, you better think about running or hiding or fighting, not digesting the food you had that morning, right? Or thinking about getting ready to take a nap. So that is that piece on noise in general. And then we think about the noises that nature makes. Even thunder, right? Some people find thunder extremely relaxing, lightning, very beautiful to look at. But if we think of more general noises in nature, like the falling of a gentle rain, birds chirping, the leaves blowing, the leaves moving through the trees, right? Because the wind is blowing, the rushing of the water through a creek, or the waves crashing on the shore. All of that typically, and everyone has a different experience and a different background, right? But typically, you're not going to find that fight or flight response is going to be elicited from those noises. So natural sounds are typically more likely to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest part of the nervous system, as opposed to the fight or flight. Of course, these are opposite sides of the same coin, right? Where our eyes are going to dilate or constrict. We are either going to start sweating or not be perspiring. But in general, you find that tends to be these associations with natural sounds in nature that can be very, very calming. And then other human-made sounds like traffic, or the backfiring of a car, or a jet starting to take off. That's not necessarily noise to put on YouTube or an audio and fall asleep to that. They can be really alarming. And an extreme version of this, of course, and I thought this was really interesting when I started looking into this, misophonia. So this is a condition where the fight or flight response is activated in a human being with what others may find really neutral or arbitrary sounds. You find this a lot when people, and some of you folks might relate to this, I know I can. This may happen when you hear someone chewing gum, breathing, crunching on chips. It can be very irritating for some people, and even trigger that fight or flight response where you're finding you're having physical and emotional reactions to these, what should be very neutral sounds. What's interesting about misophonia, where people are going to have a very negative reaction to certain sounds, they're almost always human-made sounds. Smacking of gum, chewing, even certain kinds of laughter can really put people back and make them uncomfortable. But I did want to bring up this part about misophonia because we don't see people reacting that way and experiencing that negative reaction to rain or waves or birds or the digging in the soil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And even when, as I mentioned, we're going to kind of go through the sensory experience in a different way when it comes to us being in touch with nature and the garden. But when we smell the garden, right? When we're out there digging in the soil or picking herbs or smelling the earth after a fresh rain, the saltiness of the sea, for your experience, it may be very different. where your brain goes to, where your memory goes to, as far as what smell from nature do you enjoy. But there's something going on there on a biological level as well. So olfaction in nature is really special compared to the other senses. Smells first are processed by the olfactory bulb in the brain. And what's interesting about this is the olfactory bulb has direct connections to the parts of the brain that control emotion and memory. So the amygdala and the hippocampus are being passed through directly connected to your sense of smell. And that's why you may find, on any given day, you smell something and a memory pops up or a feeling pops up. Well, these are the parts of your brain that in part control memory and emotion. And again, that sense of smell, your olfactory bulb, is making direct contact with those parts of the brain. The other senses do not. So I thought that was super, super interesting as well. An example could be that when that memory pops up or emotion tied to that memory related to smell, try to think of a time where perhaps you touch something, right? And I'm just going to grab this throw blanket in front of me. You touched a certain texture and you don't necessarily go back to, oh, wow, that tactile experience takes me right back to my grandma's house when I used to spend the night and she tucked me in with that special blanket. That might not have happened related to the tactile sense for you, but you smell something and it's, oh my gosh, that's my grandmother's jasmine growing in her backyard, or that meal that my family used to cook when I was a child. So your sense of smell is super, super tied into memory, emotion, and in such a unique way compared to the other senses. And I think I want to take this moment too, in this sense, to give the flip side, right? If our sense of smells can evoke such wonderful and positive memories, whether you're in the natural space or otherwise, it can do the opposite too. So we can be triggered when we smell certain things. It could take us to a certain place in the negative stance. But I think in this moment, it's appropriate to just recognize that is the case, but we can also use this as a coping skill for ourselves, utilizing the sensory experience when it comes to smell to calm our nerves. I am definitely not one to, practice aromatherapy per se. I know that's a whole separate school, but just using the sense of smell for a mental health and wellness benefit is super appropriate, right? Mint and lemon balm can be very energizing. Cedar can be very, very deep and warming. Lavender can be relaxing. So yeah, just a friendly reminder that we can use our sense of smell for an ability to bring ourselves back to a baseline. So many times that's really what our brains and bodies are just trying to do. We remember the best times and the worst times of our lives. And a lot of times all we need to do is come back to a baseline. The neutral is a very safe and wonderful place to be. The garden is constantly in the neutral because there really isn't like a good or bad experience there. It's all a process oriented place instead of product oriented. So I digress, but that felt really appropriate to just remind everybody to use your sense of smell for your own benefit. And I did see a chat come in, so I can check that. Is there a connection between dementia and olfactory? So I think that's a good question. And I will say, definitely not an expert in this area. We actually refer out for dementia because of the biological components to it. We do work with people as far as the mental health aspects, working with maybe the anxiety and depressed mood that may emerge because of the realization of what the brain and the body changes are going through with dementia. But I would imagine that because as we age, sense of smell reduces, right? We lose our sensory receptors in the olfactory area in the nose. We also start to lose our taste buds, right? Which is connected to smell. I would imagine that there is some type of connection between dementia and olfactory. And when it comes to memory care, because the sensory experience is so powerful, as long as that sense of smell is still there, I think there's definitely something there. I would be interested to see this put into action. I wonder if some of our partners that we work with at Tri-City out in the community would have a better answer for this. I'm definitely thinking in my mind some of the work that a couple of the doctors that we met at Casa Colina were doing would have a really good answer for this. But I think that's a great question, Brenda. Sorry I couldn't give you more information on that, but definitely something to think about. Okay. And petrichor. So you may or may not be familiar with the concept of petrichor, but petrichor is really interesting, sticking with olfaction, sticking with our sense of smell. After there's been a dry period, we haven't had rain for a while, like what we recently experienced, and literally everything flipped on its head and we got a ton of rain. That first rain we got, a very unique smell, came off the land, and that's called petrichor. After the first rain, after a long dry smell, this very deep, earthy, rich scent that comes off the planet, that comes off our area, is just wet, freshly wet soil from the rain, essentially. And similar to misophonia, where we're not going to say, oh my gosh, that rain, or just, oh, those birds. It can happen, right? Like I said, everybody's experience is different. You may hate the sound of birds. That's okay. But in general terms, we like the smell of wet soil after a fresh rain. We very much enjoy that scent. And that too goes back to ancient parts of our brain, right? When we think about our prefrontal cortex, it's incredible. We have the ability to process at a higher level, reflect, apply logic to situations, problem solve in different ways. But the older parts of the brain, the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, that are really more at times, we have the emotional components, but they're very involved with, I need to sleep, I need to eat, I need to survive, right? You kind of don't talk so much about that logical prefrontal cortex piece when you're thinking about the older parts of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex is amazing, right? We need that logic. We need to reason. We need to reevaluate things that we have done in the past in order to make decisions moving forward. But the ancient parts of the brain remember that petrichor, this scent that comes off of the earth after a rain. That means survival. That means my seeds are going to grow. That means my plants are going to continue to being watered. That means my family, my tribe, my people, we are going to survive right now because we have water, because our crops are being watered. So petrichor is a very unique scent. And it does tap into those older parts of our brain that we've kind of come far away from that, right? We enjoy the garden. We think it's a beautiful space, but we're very plugged in, and we, not so much in this group, I would imagine, but the general public has really forgotten how much we need to respect, rely on, and have a reciprocal relationship with the land we're on. Petrichor is that reminder, that scent that comes up after the rain, that reminder in the ancient parts of our brain, I need this. The land needs this. We've got to work together with the earth because I will need to continue to eat and the planet will need to continue to survive. So again, petrichor is a very pleasing scent to us. And that goes back to kind of our roots being in the land, no matter who we are, our socioeconomic status, the color of our skin. We all at some point came from tribal roots that were very aware of this concept. And that brings me to the visual piece, or one of the many visual pieces. We talked a little bit about the color green and color psychology and why that's very relevant and pertinent to us. But this theory is called prospect refuge theory. And it does acknowledge, because again, coming from the mental health side of things and looking at every group we have, every workshop we have through a therapeutic horticulture lens, we do need to keep in mind people's mental health and wellness, trauma they may have experienced, safety issues. And this is a very relevant theory when it comes to blending nature in the garden space with mental health and wellness. So as humans, we have this need, this understanding, this drive to appreciate and see nature, right? The treetops, the tree canopy, a river out in front of us, an open beach where it's not crowded and we just see nature. We have that need to see and be connected to nature. But we must feel secure and safe in that viewing. So this picture is just one, I just realized, very blurry example of what they may look like. This theory is very involved in architecture, landscape architecture, design, interior design. I want to see nature. I want to have nature accessible to me, but I must be safe because I realize there are also dangers in nature. So this example has, a huge window open. They're looking at the treescapes at the top of the trees, and yet there's these walls. So really the implication is I can see everything. I am open in nature. If it rains, I'm going to feel that wind. I'm going to feel the wetness, and I'm going to be able to see nature. But I'm also realizing that maybe some animals, again, that I'm afraid of, that the ancient, more older parts of my brain are afraid of. The bears and the cougars aren't going to sneak into this space and get me while I'm trying to enjoy my view of nature. So environments that satisfy the prospect refuge theory and what that theory is about are going to meet those needs. You're going to get your views of nature. You're going to see it accessible. You're going to see it lush, but you are going to be in a protected space. Prospect without being seen. This is a example of that as well. So ideally, you might show someone who isn't necessarily getting this information in advance. But where would you rather have just a chair, sitting down? Would you want to be on the left or on the right? On the left, it's beautiful, but whereas you can see everything in nature, you're also in a position where you can't necessarily, you are being exposed as well. So the picture on the right, you're kind of hidden. You're behind this brush, you're behind a couple trees. You can see the water, you can see the land in front of you. The prospect is there, but so is the refuge. You're safe, yet you can see. For me, at least on the left of my screen, the one that looks a lot more lush, still very beautiful, a ton of green, but you're really mixed up in there where you can see a lot less and you potentially can't see things that can see you. Safety meets an ability to connect to and see nature. And that brings me to another piece of tactile. This could definitely involve olfaction because of, us breathing in the moment. For a while, there have been studies out there on the type of bacteria that get released when you just dig in the soil. So a lot of times in our groups, when we do our in-person workshops, we would tell people, we invite you. We also use a lot of language that is very invitational because we want our group members to do what they're comfortable with, depending on different body limitations or allergies or whatever it may be. But we invite you to plant these seeds today without gloves. And if you need the gloves, by all means, please grab them. But we invite you to dig in the soil barehanded, right? We invite you to plant these seeds with your bare hands. And there's always been kind of this fun connection to digging in the soil and playing with the mud and touching the dirt. I mean, you may remember building sandcastles or making mud pies or just playing in the soil when you were a kid. But what we are starting to learn is that the microbiome can impact physical and mental health on an extraordinary level. Little bit of a disclaimer here. We are not telling anyone to stop their antidepressants or to quit going to their therapist or their pastor or their mentor or whoever and just go smell the soil, right? But what we are saying is research is building in a way that is so incredible that is showing that when you dig in the soil, bacteria is released, the particular bacteria, Mycobacterium Vaccae, and there are others, but the main one out there is this one. And it actually, when it is either ingested, breathed, right, when it's coming up in the air, or what they're finding in some of their research is they want to actually get this in pill form to inject it, it is creating increases in serotonin or dopamine to the point of antidepressant drugs. So again, not saying this should replace any of that, but it is really incredible work that's being done that just, again, at the very least, reinforces our natural, innate connection to this land. All humans since the beginning of time have gotten stressed, albeit over very different things these days than they used to in the beginning of time. But we all get stressed, right? Anxiety can be looked at in very general terms as fear about the unknown and the future. Depression exists because of things that have already happened or the past. When all these negative emotions happen, it is incredible to think that one of the many ways you could potentially deal with that is gardening. That was mind blowing. And again, I repeat that disclaimer, not recommending that you replace anything you're already doing, any medications, any techniques, with just going and digging in the garden, but how incredible. This study in particular, and I do have all my references at the end if anybody's curious about any of these in particular. Mice were injected with this bacteria from the soil, and they were placed in environments with a very aggressive male. And the mice that weren't injected had their normal fear response to that male: avoidance, they wouldn't eat, have more anxiety, more anxious behaviors. And the mice that were injected didn't show those anxious behaviors. They had less fear-based behaviors. They would get a lot closer to that aggressive male if they needed, say, food or water. So that was just very interesting to see. And this was actually first discovered in humans in Uganda in the 1970s, where certain tribes were given vaccines that were going to cause all this inflammation and, drowsiness and et cetera, all these different side effects from the vaccines. And this particular tribe didn't have any of these reactions. This bacteria was found in the soil on the riverbank in Uganda. And from there, a lot of this research has continued. So again, I kind of already said it, but the implications of this is really incredible. This particular study I read did say ultimately, this professor at, I believe it was the Boulder University in Colorado, would like to get to the point where they can get this into a pill or an injectable form. But how neat that you can just go dig in the soil, plant some seeds, do some gardening, and you are potentially, you've always loved that, right? You might just be like, oh my gosh, I love it. It's my therapy to be in the garden. I love planting seeds. I love pruning. I love weeding, right? Like people dig weeding, even though that seems like a big maintenance part that can be time consuming and tiring sometimes. But while that has made us happy, there has been on a biological level this happening in our brains, this bacteria getting into our bodies and causing those increases in serotonin and dopamine. All right, and I'm just checking really quick. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. Let me head back to this one. So this is just one little shot of our therapeutic community garden. This is when a couple of things have gone to flower. We have a little bit of borage, a little bit of radish flower. Oh no, I'm sorry, baby broccoli flower, Chinese broccoli flower. And that is coming up. They're opening up. A lot of times we will pull some plants right away if we need to get some more seeds in there. Other times you let them go to flower, let the pollinators get to them. Other times you let them go to seed, right? We have so many volunteer plants in the garden. I know my garden as well. I walked out there the other day in an area I was not watering at all, had just beets coming up everywhere. I'm like, I didn't plant any of those, but I had let a beet gone to seed and it just self-seeded. And now I am super excited to have my volunteer beets that I never thinned. So they are going to look really interesting because they're super close to each other. But this is just a random shot of our garden, just going in that stage, right? The flowering of the broccoli, ideally, if you're on a corporate level or want to sell your big farm, you want to sell to the grocery store, you never want your broccoli to get to this state, but there is a value to this state. As I mentioned, the pollinators, the flowers are edible. We're creating seeds. We're creating a plant that's going to self-seed itself, for the next season. And it's always a nice surprise to see that. But this is just a little shot of our therapeutic community garden. Sometimes we give tours of our space, but really today the goal was to travel through the senses. We talked about the color green, prospect refuge theory of seeing out there and what it means to see, but also be safe. We talked a little bit about how our sense of smell, our sight, our hearing, how that is also special and different when it comes to the garden space and nature. So just wanted to thank everyone, for being here. See if you had any questions or comments. I will share our schedule as well if we have time, but I do want to pivot to any discussion first and prioritize that if anybody has any questions about what they saw or heard. And here's my contact info. Oh, I saw Stuart's hand. Go ahead, Stuart. Oh, do I have to switch back host duties or something? Oh, I have to unmute everyone. Sorry, guys, I forgot I was
I
host.
think I just got it, Sarah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much for that, Sarah. That was such great information. And then I have a couple questions for you to get started, but anyone who's viewing this, if you have questions, please raise your hand or put it in the chat box or just let us know. So my first question for you is just how, all this like sort of research back theoretical sensory elements that you talked about, like how do you take that the sort of theoretical academic side and implement it in the practical real side of the garden at Tri-City? So like, are you thinking of each of these elements as you're designing the garden, or as you're designing the curriculum, or like how does that theory get put into place like in the
Yes. So it's really interesting because we have a few different kinds of groups. So most of our groups are through a therapeutic horticulture lens, which is going to combine the theory, the technique, the actual activity, right? We might be walking them through an activity and then telling them the how and the why we did this, and encourage people to generalize it outside the session. So, for example, I did a technique on, we'll bring in the breathing piece, right? We taught people belly breathing, box breathing, mindful breathing, and encourage them to do it in a natural space or by a window or on their patio. So from there, kind of discuss, was that practice enhanced by being outside or inside? And also, what did you prefer? Was it the box breathing? Was it the belly breathing? Or was it the mindful breathing? Remind them in that moment that, our lungs are just filling with this oxygen and contracting. And if you were outside when you did this activity in a really neat way, you were breathing in oxygen, what the plants just gave off, and you were giving off carbon, which the plants need to a degree, right? So we talk about that reciprocal relationship even in that moment, because, at the end of the day, if we my first priority is your mental health and wellness, right? If you're in one of my groups. But what a beautiful side effect is that when people realize that there's a reciprocal relationship to nature and how it improves their ability to use a technique or improve mental health and wellness, they care about nature. They then care about the garden. They want to contribute to increasing green space. They want to learn to be more self-sustainable. So I think every week we have a different curriculum, and actually my colleague also runs a gardening 101 reconnect to the garden on Friday, which is straight up like gardening advice, right? Let me teach you how to do pest management, how to prune. Let me teach you about what your weeds mean. If you have certain weeds coming up, that tells me something about your soil. And people are just enhancing that educational piece of wellness. But there's always something to learn. It's actually, I got to give kudos to the team too. We come up with new curriculum pretty much every week, based on the season we're in, what's growing in the garden, a need we may see. I did a lesson on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that's going to talk about your base needs at the bottom, the pyramid goes up, self-actualization at the top. That's a really high level, amazing, high moral value goal to get there. But some of us are just working on trying to figure out how to make a really good, sustainable relationship with someone, how to connect to the earth, how to take better care of our bodies, maybe even how to find housing. So we may throw in something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, give some psychoeducation about that, and then plug in where nature and the garden space actually falls into every single level in different ways. We have an extensive amount of curriculum that we've written over the years to present to the community, and it always looks different. I have colleagues that write curriculum as well. And yeah, to answer your question, it is an ongoing challenge. We love it. We go through an approval process. Our manager, Dr. Nicole Lobato, makes sure that it is touching on goals of therapeutic horticulture and combining the two. But yeah, I think it's different all the time, and the work is so extensive. I mean, we understand a lot more about the brain than we do about the mind, and then you add this layer of the outdoors and nature. It can be a challenge to write curriculum sometimes, but we always make it happen, and we'll collaborate and try to bring something new every week.
That's great. Thank you for that. And then
Yeah.
I see a question from Richard.
Mhm.
How do you know what particular therapy will be helpful for a particular person? Is it is it is the therapy aimed specifically at certain types of to certain people, or is it more generalized like therapy? Or how does, when somebody comes to you, how do you sort of recommend a curriculum or a course or a workshop, or how does that sort of work?
Yes, and I think I have two ways to answer this. So for me, as a therapist who started in individual therapy, I'm not going to work from a psychodynamic perspective, very Freudian, very we must dig into your past in order to move forward. If someone is sitting in their immediate trauma, fearful, anxious, I might use something more like a seeking safety technique, which addresses the individual in the now. Through a seeking safety lens, you work on the now and move forward. You don't necessarily have to bring all that up from the past right now, because right now it's about safety and moving forward. Similarly, I might bring something in, and we are groups. So our lessons do tend to be general, but we're also bringing in theory, technique. I've cited many specific um, theoretical orientations when I do certain lessons. Like I might say, this is a cognitive behavioral therapy approach, and really break it down for them. And then there's that connection to the outdoors. But the other way I wanted to answer your question is when it comes to therapeutic horticulture, which is what we practice, we are not registered horticultural therapists. There are the two different levels of this practice. For our therapeutic horticulture, the research shows that it is incredible with children. It is incredible with older adults. It is incredible with veterans. It is incredible when people are anxious because of that ability for nature to ground us and bring us back to a baseline. Like I was saying earlier, we just epitomize the worst and the best times in our lives, and that's the memories that we have. But right now, as you're sitting on that couch, as you're sitting on your porch, as you're sitting in that chair, this is a neutral moment. It's not super, oh my gosh, and it's not, I'm having the worst day of my life. But that neutral moment is so safe and grounding. We will bring, that in, because nature is just so appropriate on so many levels. But yes, the research does show certain populations are particularly finding a benefit from therapeutic horticulture. I have a colleague in Northern California who works in a lot of the prison programs, and I butcher this word every time. But in the male prisons where she presents a therapeutic horticulture program for inmates, the recidivism, did I say that right? Okay, I always butcher that word. That rate is like 4% from the graduates in her horticultural therapy program. It is incredible. So yeah, on a population level, there's data out there that shows how and why it may be beneficial for certain populations. For our groups, we have, master's students, the neighbor around the corner from Tri-City who just wanted to join, a client in our FSP program next to a student from Laverne, all in that virtual, right now virtual, we're in pre-construction, but in that virtual room with us, doing these sessions. And very different lifestyles, very different situations. We may work with someone who just came off of a yacht trip over the weekend, with someone else in the room who is struggling finding housing. So it is up to us as the clinicians, as the mental health specialists, to really balance those groups. We really want to make sure it's a respectful space. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it could go in a lot of different directions. And the research is just, at this point, it's extensive, it's amazing. I am here representing Tri-City Mental Health, but I will also say that you can find a lot of research through the Journal of Horticultural Therapy. A lot of good stuff there. I would recommend absolutely peeking in on that.
Great. And then
Yes.
Elise
Yes,
Bree
Elise.
has a question, about toddlers and young infants, and how you work with
Let me
young people.
see.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Great question. So I will say right off the bat, I would love to find out, because part of the reason 0 to 25 is very difficult to reach is It's difficult to get them enrolled. It's difficult to get parent buy-in. They're very, very busy, just developmentally going through the stages they're going through, getting consents. The Tay population for us historically, we have groups available for the youth. They are historically pretty low turnout. Our most successful groups are our 55 plus group, our 18 plus group, our gardening group, our Spanish speaking adult group, but our family groups and our youth groups, it is difficult to get a population in there to go long enough to see what works. I will say when they increase green space or bring in therapeutic horticulture programming to different cities, you do see that crime goes down, that grades go up, that having that connection to nature and learning about why our mental health and wellness is really dependent on that green space and the gardens. You see things change in communities. Unfortunately, as you guys know, I work in Tri-City. We do have a location in Claremont, but most of our locations are in Pomona. And when you look at the statistics for LA County, for cities that have the most green space, Pomona is really, really low on the list. So I would be interested to see gardens increase in Pomona, green space, to have the opportunity to look at that more. With infants, I don't know much about infants specifically. I know there's a lot of restriction when they're really little, but I also know they always say, hey, let them eat a little bit of dirt, right? That's good for them. We just learned about the Mycobacterium. But I think infants, I haven't seen a lot done out there with them. It might be difficult to get them in. I think you could see immediate benefits experientially, but I think it's going to be difficult to get that research done. To track validity and reliability because of what it would take to get studies going with the infants. But yeah, we've had toddlers, we've had 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. They absolutely do not do well with the virtual setting. I'll tell you that. We tried. We had them out there in the gardening portion of it. We have the low beds, and I will say, without saying too much, we have had children who were, and I know this isn't a study, this is just from my own work in the garden and the kiddos, we've had children be virtually nonverbal. And by the time they've done, a few months in the program, a year in the program, they were talking so much more, and the words just came little by little, and the comfort was there, being in the earth and being in the garden. Don't know if there's research to back that up, but I have seen some pretty incredible stuff happen just being with the kids in the soil. I hope that helps a little bit, Elise. But yeah, I think we're a little limited when it comes to the studies with the infants for sure. And I'd love to see the 0 to 25 population, as far as our groups and in general, get more in touch with this modality, or a modality that works for them in general. Because for me, I remember junior high just being awful. If I would have known there were like some really interesting things to do when it comes to mental health and wellness, like I think people would have a different experience in those really difficult developmental stages.
Okay, great. And then actually Drew just dropped something in here. I've read a little bit about social and psychological benefits of engagement and habitat restoration and community tree planting. I missed the first half of the talk. Any additional thoughts on that, on habitat restoration and tree planting, things like that?
Yeah, so it's not something I touched on, but I think in general, it goes back to, you may have someone who's already really digging that and wants to be a part of that and finds that higher levels of morality and values and purpose and meaning are really being tapped into with that type of thing. And then you may have someone who doesn't care at all, right? But through being involved in potential programs like this, what we have seen is all of a sudden there's a realization that there is a reciprocal relationship with the earth. And I have to say, not every time, right? But you can see a trend that, wow, I'm connected in this way. The planet, this space, this patch of brown is thankful for what I've done. I'm thankful for the experience. It needs me. I need it. I think what ends up happening a lot of times through these modalities, and certainly through habitat restoration, is the reciprocal relationship is developed. The realization that it exists. And following that, I'll throw in the cognitive behavioral therapy aspect, right? Follows. Thoughts change, behaviors change, feelings change as a result of certain experiences. So yeah, I didn't get too much into that. And this isn't something that our therapeutic community garden gets into per se, because we really are focused on that therapeutic horticulture piece, but it is just another way to get in touch with the land around you, to get your hands dirty, as they say, to release those good bacterium out of the soil, to breathe the fresh air, and to realize, hold up, I need this space. This is survival. This is connecting me to my roots, to my ancestors. Yeah, no problem. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and just really quick, sorry, just to jump in with that. I was sort of wondering, I don't know if there's much to add here, but it feels like there's this big continuum of like what nature or green or gardens are. And, you operate the garden space, and a lot of the research is talking about, the benefits of being in nature. And then like my Zen is just having my tea underneath the tree in the front yard for my mental reset. And from being next to a tree to doing community tree plantings or restoration projects, I just wonder if that's, sort of the individual aspect of how people sort of react to just being in nature at all these different levels. And if
absolutely,
some people, it's as simple as growing tomatoes, and some people it's being out in a forest for a day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just being, I like this quote. She teaches forest bathing, and she says, sometimes you just need to just be with a tree. Like, have you ever really looked at the bark? Have you looked up in a while, right? And seen what's moving, where does the darkness lie? Where's the light? Where are the shadows? If you look at the ground of the tree, the base of the tree, look at the root system. Which direction are they going? Are they above ground, below ground? What kind of critters are down there? It can be extremely grounding to just be with a tree. You don't necessarily have to plant the tree or prune the tree or harvest the tree. Again, coming from that therapeutic horticulture perspective, we'll tell people the day you plant the seed is not the day you pick the fruit, and a lesson of patience and waiting, and maybe just sitting with that tea for a while, every day for months is going to happen. So you eventually get to the harvest. But yeah, it is absolutely going to be different for everyone. Some people stick to the aquaponics, or they do the hydroponics. I don't have a yard. I don't, they might say, I'm going to work on hydroponics. So it's very, very different for everyone. And I think at the end of the day, it's how can the garden or nature, and it probably already is, right, be used to impact my wellness and my mental health. And wellness, this is like a whole nother, presentation, but we used to be seen as either healthy or unhealthy by the pure like medical model perspective, right? If you had illness or injury, you were unhealthy. There was something that made you unhealthy. But now everyone is moving towards a perspective of wellness. There's 8 areas, right? You might be socially well, educationally well, emotionally well, financially well, environmentally well, et cetera, et cetera. And because of that, when you sit by that tree with your tea, you may notice, oh, I feel super environmentally well right now. I'm feeling very spiritually well. I'm feeling very physically well. I'm grounded, right? My shoes are off. So yeah, it does look different for everyone. And I think for everyone, it is tapping into different areas of the 8 dimensions of wellness from SAMHSA. Just want to plug, say SAMHSA, because that's their model that they designed, the 8 dimensions of wellness. But yeah, it really allowed us to be multidimensional instead of just healthy or unhealthy, because by the old definition, nobody in this room is healthy. And that is very defeating. So we are all beings of wellness, and there's 8 dimensions to that by this one theory.
And then our last question from Brenda, have you seen any partnerships with schools, like school counseling within a green space, wellness gardens, reaching out to youth group populations? Is that part of what Tri-City is doing, or part of?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we've worked with elementary schools. We've worked with colleges, like day programs as well, art programs, Dawes Center for the Arts is someone we partnered with recently. I know with some of the schools I had worked with in the past, when we came back, unfortunately, a lot of these gardens and green spaces weren't able to be maintained during the pandemic. So we are looking at reconnecting, seeing how and if we can be a part of rejuvenating programming, even if it's fun, just having a workshop and bringing in a little bit of green, leaving some of that with you, along with a technique that you can use, but yeah, we definitely try to partner with schools. We'd love to partner with more. We're here to serve the community. So if you know someone who could benefit, if you know someone who's in programming or a teacher, an advocate, yeah, Therapeutic Community Garden, actually, I'll put my contact, if that's okay. Can I throw my contact info on one more time?
Yeah, of course.
Since there's just a couple minutes left, I'll make sure to leave this part up on the screen. There it is.
Oh, do I need to screen share with you again? Sorry.
I don't know. Let me see if I could share just like this. I think I can. No, host disabled participants.
Okay, sorry, 1 second.
It's okay. And thank you all so much for your attention and your ears. I am not an agriculture or horticulture expert, but I really enjoy this modality. It has been incredible. I've learned so much, and I'm excited to be a part of this field that's actually been around there for a very long time, but you don't hear about it as much as you hear about like pet therapy and art therapy. So it's really exciting that therapeutic horticulture is continuing to grow.
All right, I have one more question for you,
Yes.
Sarah, before we let you go. All right, so if we're all convinced and we want to come to a class or come to the garden or workshop or whatever, like how do we find it? Do we need like an insurance card? If we live outside of these 3 cities, are there other tri-cities that offer the same programs? Like how do we get more involved?
Yeah, so if you are interested in our programming, and I will say again, we're pre-construction right now. So the virtual programming we created during pandemic is still happening, because if we go back out into the garden and say, hey, we're breaking ground next week, we kick everyone back out again, it would feel awful. So we're continuing the virtual programming until construction is done. If you want to join virtual groups now, whether they be therapeutic horticulture groups or the gardening groups, Reconnect to the Garden, you would call this number. Ask for someone from the garden. They'll get you connected to myself, Sarah Rodriguez. I'm one of the clinicians. My colleague Corey is another clinician. My colleague Elizabeth is a mental health specialist. My colleague Kira is our therapeutic community garden farmer. We will get you enrolled. We don't ask what insurance you have because we're prevention and early intervention, so we don't bill. So it doesn't matter, who you're covered by, if you have the best insurance or no insurance at all. We're there to support you. And with all of our groups, you qualify for free produce. We don't use any chemicals. We don't use herbicides, pesticides. We try to be as natural as possible. I like that because it's the more difficult way of gardening, right? But it's better for you. And there's a lot of lessons in that too. Like maybe what we're doing right now in the garden, we could explain to people it's a little bit more time consuming or a little bit more tedious, but the end result is better, So yeah, I would say call the number if you have additional questions. I work 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday for the most part. And I do appreciate, again, just your ears and looking at this special modality.
Great, thank you so much. And then we had a final question on where the garden is located, and I just dropped a link to the
thank you
garden site in the chat box there.
Beautiful.
So hopefully that's set. Okay, Sarah, thank you so much again for presenting to us. Always super interesting and super helpful, and such a great service for the community around us. And so we hope we'll see you back in another couple months for maybe another presentation. We'll just keep this.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you everybody so much for attending tonight. And we'll see you at our next dialogue.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.